Hi all, it's currently May 28th, 2024, and today I'd like to share with you how I set up what you could call an orchidarium. I'd like to preface this by saying I am new to growing orchids, so I'm definitely still prone to making mistakes, and I am by no means an expert. I'd also like to thank Hillbilly Orchids, Wade's Orchids, Cloud Forest Vibes, Ed's Orchids, as well as Rick L. Orchids, who left an encouraging comment on one of my videos, so that was very nice. But these channels are kind of my motivation to make something like this. I've learned a lot from their videos, so I would encourage you guys to check them out. I will link their channels as well as other resources that I've found useful. I'd also like to say that the way I grow mostly comes out of necessity. I have no backyard or no garage, so I have a very limited amount of space to grow. Secondly, I think a lot of my tendencies come from my experience with reptile keeping. I've been keeping reptiles much longer than I've been growing orchids, so a lot of the things I've learned from reptile keeping kind of translated to how I grow my orchids. I also keep reptiles in naturalistic environments where controlling parameters like temperature and humidity is very important to the well-being of the animal as well as the tank's system, so to speak. So with all of that being said, I'd like to describe how I went about setting up this grow space. So to start with, the terrarium that I grow in is actually a reptile enclosure. It is an 18 by 18 by 36 inch tall screen reptile enclosure. So it may be difficult to tell on the camera, but this is actually screen, and it's on all sides of the enclosure with an aluminum frame. This is nice because it is very lightweight, and it's also much less expensive than a glass terrarium of the same dimensions would be. Of course, screen is not very conducive to holding humidity, so taking a page out of reptile keeping, I have lined all sides of it with window insulation. So essentially, I have placed double-sided tape on the perimeter and then attach this window insulation, which can be shrunk down after you heat it. So that way it's kind of nice and taut and not loose. So it looks presentable, but it also does a much better job of holding in humidity. The frame of the terrarium is also not airtight. You can see on the framing there are holes or cracks for air to get in, so it's not completely airtight and devoid of air coming into it. One other issue with using screen is light will leak from it very easily. So this is something I figured I'd try. I have placed corrugated plastic on all sides of the enclosure except the front panel and the top panel. And my hope for this is that it is going to reflect light back into the enclosure instead of having it just go out of the screen. So this will hopefully give plants at the bottom level a little bit more light than they would otherwise. You could definitely use a material specifically made for reflection, but I find that this has been working well for me so far. It's also very easy to cut this corrugated plastic. It's very malleable. It also allows for stuff to be mounted on it, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So again, there is window insulation on all sides except for the bottommost panel, where there's no window insulation, and instead I just have a piece of corrugated plastic that's cut about to size. It also has intake for my humidifier, and this is how I control humidity in it. This intake leads to my smart humidifier. Sorry, it's very messy back there. But it leads to the smart humidifier, which is connected to the thermometer and hydrometer in the enclosure. Both of these connect to my phone, which has an app that allows me to set a target humidity that I want the enclosure to stay at. So in this case, I have it set to 80. So anytime the enclosure drops below 80, the humidifier will kick on until that target humidity is reached. And this has been a really good solution for me, at least, because of the smart features on both the hydrometer and the humidifier. For the final appliance, it is the light. This is actually an 18-inch long aquarium LED light. I'm very pleased with this light so far. It gives off very little heat, which is good for me because I don't want it heating the entire enclosure. It also has some functionality to adjust the light level. You can set cycles on here, so on 12 hours, off 12 hours, and so forth. So it's been working out very well for me. I'm really pleased with the light overall. So moving into the enclosure, you can see that I have at the bottom, there is a plastic panel which came with the enclosure. It also has this egg crate, which is used to prop plants off, so it's not directly on the bottommost panel, just to prevent any plants from sitting in stagnant water. You can see here I have a small structure made out of the egg crate, which is used to attach my computer fan, is what I found it as. It is a good solution because you can adjust the speed of it, so you can have more or less flow out of it. It also takes very little electricity, but generally if you are to grow in something like this, like a terrarium, especially in the way that I have it where the majority of the sides are closed off, having a fan is probably one of the most important parts of it, because it's circulating the air in there. And this prevents all sorts of problems of, bacterial, fungal issues. It also allows oxygen to flow over the plants, which is one of the most important things for these plants to grow, especially all these epiphytes. So having a fan inside of the enclosure is something I'd really highly recommend. When it comes to mounting the plants, I have used this, what you could call a chicken wire, plastic chicken wire. I have essentially attached it with a zip tie to all of the corrugated plastic, and then it just runs down. From there, this is how I attach my plants to it, just with some wire. So again, because I have the fan running in there 24/7, this allows the majority of my plants, especially the mounted ones, to either entirely or approach drying out. I find this very beneficial because no orchid likes to be sitting completely saturated, of course, but even orchids that prefer to be kept moist, I think really do benefit from having a wet-dry cycle. It just depends on how dry you allow them to get. So by having this constant airflow, I let almost all of the plants dry out or approach drying out within 24 hours. So because of that, I am watering and feeding on a daily basis. I subscribe to the idea of fertilizing with weak amounts often. So I'm feeding all of my plants every single day for the most part, with the exception of flushing, which I also do frequently. For the exact fertilizer, I'd encourage you guys to do your own research, or Rick L. has talked about this extensively, but I am using a MSU fertilizer at about 100 parts per million. I will also include Epsom salts or CalMag or neither. I'm kind of switching up the amount that I use or the different levels of nutrients and micronutrients frequently. I will also feed with a kelp-based fertilizer monthly or every 3 weeks. And then finally, I flush all of these orchids frequently. You could do it every nth watering, or you could designate the last week of the month to just flushing with water. Whatever works best for you. I just found that this works for me. So just to demonstrate, what I will often do is I will first mist down the plant with distilled water. In my case, you could use reverse osmosis or rainwater. I'm sure many of you guys could use tap water, but I use distilled water. So I will mist it down, which is useful for not only further diluting the fertilizer you apply, but oftentimes when you're using something like sphagnum moss, it will, as it approaches dryness, or if it is entirely dry, it can become maybe hydrophobic isn't the right word, but it can be difficult to have water saturated. So I don't want to go just spraying my fertilizer on it and having it just repel off. So I first apply some distilled water, and then I will feed. In this case, I'm using 100 parts per million MSU with some CalMag in there, which is actually higher than I usually feed, but because it's summertime, I'm feeding at a higher concentrate. And again, I'm doing this every single day, and my plants seem to be responding to it really well. So that is everything I want to talk about. I really like this setup. It works well for me. It's fairly inexpensive, and it does the purpose that I need it to. So if you guys have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. I'm always trying to improve this and see if I can find ways to grow my plants better. So thank you. Any last words? No. Okay. Well, that is all for now. I appreciate anybody that may have watched this. If you guys have questions or suggestions, do let me know. So thanks all.